Richard Barry Randolph. The brutal 1988 murder that haunted the town of East Palatka, Florida, ends with an execution on November 20th. Hello, and welcome back to the Justice and Injustice channel. Today, from death row, we're writing a record of his execution. Today, we're closing the book on a case that defined brutality in 1980s Florida. This is the story of Richard Barry Randolph, a convicted murderer who raped, beat, and stabbed his victim, a kind 62-year-old manager, not in a moment of panic, but while pausing to continue opening a safe. And when the end came for Randolph on Thursday, November 20th, 2025, it was swift, silent, and without complication. Please like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. The crime. The date was August 15th, 1988. The location. The Handyway convenience store in East Palatka, Florida. His isn't a massive city. This is the kind of small town where everyone knows everyone, especially the local convenience store manager. That manager was 62-year-old Minnie Ruth McCollum. Customers thought the world of her. She was described as a kind of public figure, a loving wife for 47 years, a mother. She was, by all accounts, a wonderful, beloved person. But that morning, shortly after 7 a.m., the store was visited by a ghost from the past, 27-year-old Richard Barry Randolph, a former employee. Randolph had a simple criminal objective: to force open the safe and steal all the money inside. Randolph didn't need the money for anything other than feeding his crack addiction. He has a girlfriend and a son, but he won't use it out of necessity, but for a much more vile purpose: his powerful addiction. Randolph's plan immediately went sideways when McCollum walked in and spotted him. What followed was a scene of brutal and prolonged violence. Randolph attacked. He beat McCollum in the head with his fists. He kicked her. He choked her. He stabbed her with a knife in the throat. All because she could positively identify him as a former coworker. But here's the truly sickening detail that sets this crime apart. The court records state that Randolph was taking breaks from the attack to continue trying to get into the safe. While his former manager lay bleeding, beaten, and struggling, he was focused on $200. After beating, strangling, and stabbing her, Randolph raped McCollum. Then, unable to open the safe, he fled the scene with stolen lottery tickets and McCollum's car, leaving her for dead. That morning, when Terry Sorrell, a regular customer, and Dorothy and Deborah Patilla, as store managers, saw Randolph, dressed in a Handyway bathrobe, closing the front door. When the Patillas inquired about Mrs. McCollum's whereabouts and why the store was locked, Randolph told them that Mrs. McCollum's car had broken down and that she had taken his car. He indicated that he had repaired her car and was leaving to pick her up. Randolph then drove away in Mrs. McCollum's car. The women tried the door and, finding it locked, peered in through the window. They saw that the security camera in the ceiling was pulled down. Wires were coming out of the trash can, which had been tipped over. The area behind the counter was in disarray, and the door to the back room, normally kept open, was almost completely closed. Thinking that something was awry, they called the sheriff's office. After breaking into the store, a deputy found Mrs. McCollum lying on her back, naked from the waist down, with blood coming out of the back of her head and neck. She was breathing and moaning slightly. The deputy also observed a knife beside her head. Paramedics transported Mrs. McCollum to the hospital. Dr. Kirby Bland, a general surgeon, testified that Mrs. McCollum arrived at the *333 emergency room comatose, and with her head massively beaten and contused. She had multiple skin breaks and skin lacerations about the scalp, face, and neck, and her left jawbone was fractured. Dr. Bland indicated that Mrs. McCollum had knife lacerations to the left side of her neck that caused a hematoma around the heart. There was also a stab wound in the area of the left eye. Dr. Albert Roten, Jr., a neurologist, testified that in 20 years of neurosurgical practice, he had not seen brain swelling so diffuse, and he likened it to someone who had been ejected out of a car or thrown from a motorcycle and received multiple hits on the head. McCollum died at the hospital 6 days after the assault. She died of severe brain injuries. Judge Robert Perry would later say at sentencing that it was clear McCollum agonized over her injuries and impending death through her repeated screams during the beatings, strangulation, and stabbing. After leaving the handy way, Randolph drove Mrs. Mike Collum's car to the home of Norma Janine Betts, Randolph's girlfriend and mother of their daughter. She testified that he admitted robbing the Handyway store and attacking Mrs. McCollum. He told her that he was going to Jacksonville to borrow money from the manager of a Save-A-Lot grocery store and cash in lottery tickets. He promised to return to take Betts and their daughter to North Carolina. Randolph's freedom didn't last long. He was arrested soon after the attack at a Jacksonville grocery store, trying to borrow money and cash in the stolen lottery tickets. He admitted to the attack and even led investigators to the bloody clothing he had discarded. The evidence was overwhelming, and a year later, in 1989, Richard Barry Randolph was convicted of first-degree murder, sexual battery, armed robbery, and grand theft auto. He was sentenced to death. During the sentencing phase, Randolph's trial attorneys argued he didn't deserve the death penalty. Their argument rested on several points. He was adopted and claimed he never had a loving relationship with his mother. He had an antisocial disorder, and he claimed he was under the influence of crack cocaine when he killed McCollum. Judge Perry dismissed those arguments, calling the assertion that Randolph was high on crack self-serving. He ruled that Randolph was loved by his adoptive parents and that his personality disorder didn't excuse the sheer brutality of the premeditated violence. The judge's ruling zeroed in on the premeditation. Randolph and McCollum were co-workers. She knew who he was. He had to silence his victim to prevent his detection and arrest. And so began decades of appeals, the standard, agonizing process that follows a death sentence. But in the final weeks before his execution date, Randolph's attorneys brought up a new, unsettling argument, focusing not on his guilt, but on his medical condition. The final appeal. They sought to stop the execution, arguing that the 3-drug protocol Florida uses for its lethal injections would cause him a torturous death because Randolph suffers from lupus. They argued his adoptive father was abusive. His adoptive mother had a drinking problem, and cited his growth as a person and his positive prison record over the nearly 40 years he spent behind bars. The Florida Supreme Court was not persuaded. They called the attack on McCollum brutal and prolonged, and ruled that the lupus claim was simply too late. Randolph was diagnosed in 1990. The lethal injection protocol had been essentially unchanged since 2017. The court wrote that the claim was untimely. The legal options had run out. The date was set. Execution Day, November 20th, 2025, Florida State Prison near Stark. It's the final morning for Richard Barry Randolph. Randolph awoke at 6:30 a.m. His last day would follow the grim, well-worn routine of the death chamber. He was later given his final meal, a cheeseburger, fries, and ice cream. He had one visitor during the day. Notably, a Department of Corrections official confirmed that Randolph did not meet with a spiritual advisor. 3 members of Minnie Ruth McCollum's family, however, were expected to attend. Imagine what that day must be like for the victim's family. 37 years after the trauma, they stand ready to witness the final, irreversible act of justice for a woman who was brutally stripped of her life. As the clock ticked toward 6 p.m., the weight of the moment wasn't just about Randolph. The lawyers hoped to halt the execution at the last minute. But Florida maintains a long list of death row inmates, creating an urgent need to close cases and bring long-awaited peace to the victims' families. In the case of Minnie Ruth McCollum, both her husband and son have passed away. And they never saw this convict pay for all the harm he caused. The final moments. At 6 p.m., the final procedure began. The 3-drug lethal injection protocol. The lethal injection is a carefully monitored, somber procedure. The state's spokesperson Alex Lanfranconi later told that there were no complications during the procedure. And then, the final chilling detail that closes the book on Richard Barry Randolph. A man convicted of one of the most brutal, prolonged, and sexually violent crimes in the state's history, who spent decades appealing his sentence, offered no final statement. No apology, no confession, no defiance. Just silence. At 6:12 p.m., just 12 minutes after the injection began, Richard Barry Randolph, 63, was pronounced dead. The execution was swift. The justice for Minnie Ruth McCollum's family was final. The silence was absolute. For Minnie McCollum's family, they carried the trauma of August 1988 for 37 years, finally finding resolution in a silent room in Stark. It's easy to focus solely on the killer's past, the poor childhood, the antisocial disorder. But Judge Perry's final ruling reminds us where the focus must remain: on the victim, on the person who agonized over her injuries, on the woman who was a beloved public figure, whose life was violently, agonizingly extinguished over an attempted robbery. And Randolph's silence in his final moments speaks volumes. It offered no clarity, no remorse, no sense of closure beyond the finality of the law. The record of 17 executions constitutes a powerful commitment to justice, not only to the families of the victims, but also to the history of justice in Florida, a symbol of the state's firm stance regarding capital punishment for the most brutal and premeditated crimes. Thank you for confronting this dark corner of justice with me.